Let's talk about starting seeds from start to finish because anyone can get a seed to sprout, but getting a seed from germination to a healthy plant is a whole different thing. It's very important to know that not all plants need the same thing. Some do better if they're direct sown, like radishes, which don't benefit from starting indoors, and others have a better chance of success if you start them indoors, like broccoli and cauliflower. So today we're going to talk about the requirements that you need for both of them to be successful. So we're going to go step by step. So just come along with me and we'll start with the direct sown first. So the first step is prepping your ground. You want to make sure that you have all the weeds removed. And if you need to top your bed off, go ahead and top your bed off before you start your seeds. If you're topping off with a compost, make sure that the compost is completely matured before you start your seeds, because you don't want to put seeds into hot compost because it will burn the seeds. And if you don't know how to tell if a compost is fully matured, then you can tell by how hot it is. So if you put your hand down into the soil several inches and it's still hot, then it's not mature yet. So you want to use a mature compost. If it's not mature, then you want to let it spread it out and give it 2 weeks before you put any seeds in it. Now, once you have your bed ready and prepared, then we can start our seed. Now, whether you're planting in a raised bed, a container, or a traditional garden, you always want to pay attention to the spacing on your package. So your package usually, I believe that's it right there, usually indicates the spacing along with the seed depth and things like that. So you want to look to see what the spacing is that's required. So in a raised bed, you have a little bit of leeway with the spacing because you can use what they call a diamond pattern in order to utilize more space in your garden bed. And that means you will use the traditional spacing on the first row, and then when you do the second row, you can do it a little bit closer by putting it in the middle of two plants rather than lined up directly with the plant beside it. If you have a watering system, you can stretch out your lines and use the emitters to tell the spacing inches, because they're usually 6 to 12 inches. So you can use that as a guide, or you can create a stick that's the appropriate length and use that as a guide so that you kind of keep a straight line. Keeping a straight line in a raised bed or even a garden bed helps you in maintaining your watering system and in maintaining your plants. It also helps if you have a traditional garden, makes it easier for you to till in between the rows and keep the weeds out. So planting in a straight line is a good idea. I know not everybody cares whether it's straight or not, um, but it does help in the maintenance in the long run. So these are things to think about before you put that seed into the ground. Now, once you've determined where you're going to plant it and you have your bed all prepared, then you want to look also on the package to see what the planting depth is. It's important to know what the planting depth is. A lot of people plant their seeds too deep, and therefore it doesn't germinate properly, or it has so far to travel by the time it gets up that it causes the plant to be weak. So you want to make sure that you have a proper planting depth. So different seeds will have different planting depths. A seed that's large like this may be planted an inch deep versus something like broccoli, which is barely just going to be underneath the surface. You don't want more than probably a fourth of an inch of dirt over the top of it because this is a very small seed. With lettuce, you're going to just rake the surface and kind of sprinkle that in there and just barely rake anything back over the top of it. If you have something like this seed, which is a little bit larger, but not quite as large as the bean seeds, then this can have more of a half of an inch in depth. So making sure that you have the proper depth is very important in ensuring successful germination. So before you put your seed in the ground, it's good to wet the soil first, because water is really important in ensuring proper germination. If you put it into dry soil, then it's probably not going to germinate until you water it well. Now, once you have your soil wet, since this one only needs about a half an inch, I'm just going to move a little bit of the dirt from the top and place my seeds in there. And I usually put 2 seeds in. That way, if one of them doesn't germinate, hopefully the other one will. And once that is done, I'm just going to put a little bit of the dirt back over the top of it and press it down so it has good soil contact. And I'm gently water it again. You have to be very careful of watering after you place your seeds because you can end up washing the seed away. Now, once you have placed your seed in the ground, you want to make sure that you keep it watered until the seed germinates and until the plant is established. You also want to protect your sprouts from pest pressure, so you can sprinkle them with diatomaceous earth just to keep them protected until they get good and established. And as you can see here, these are the these are the leaves that first come up when a plant sprouts. And this right here is what they call a true leaf. This is its first true leaf that it has formed. So until it's formed one of these, it's not really established yet. With your green bean seeds, you want to plant, and with all of these, you want to plant at least 2 of them anytime you're planting. So what I do with these can go down a little bit deeper, so I just kind of press them down with my finger or stick, and I'm only pressing them about that far because they can go all the way up to an inch. Then you're going to make sure it has good contact with the soil and press it down, and then add just a little bit more water. And you want to keep it moist, but you don't want to overwater with beans because you can actually rot the bean. So some seeds like these dill seeds are very small, as you can see here. And so these, you don't really want to try to bury them. So what you're going to do is when you've got your ground prepared, and make sure that you get something straight to ensure that you have a straight line. But you're just going to make a little furrow. And that's all you really need to do is just make a little furrow. And then you take your seeds and you're going to sprinkle them into the furrow. And then you're just going to gently press the dirt over it. And then press down to make sure it has good contact. As the plants get a little bit bigger, you're going to determine when you have more than one that comes up like this, then you want to determine which one is the stronger one and the other one you want to pull up. Now you can either snip this at the ground with a pair of snips, or if it's far enough away from the other plant, you can just pull it on up, and you can try to transplant it in another place if you don't want to lose it altogether. Um, but if it's really close to the other plant, I would recommend snipping it rather than pulling it because the roots could be tangled together and you can end up pulling the healthier plant up when you're pulling up this one. And it is advisable to go ahead and pull up any extras, and so that they're not competing for nutrients and space underneath. So it's tempting to leave them both together. And they may be successful if you leave them both together, but you have better success if you pull up the weaker one and leave the stronger one. So now that we've covered how to direct sow seeds, let's talk about starting seeds indoors. Because as we discussed, there's some things that will benefit more or have a better chance of success if you start them indoors versus directly sowing them into your garden. And in the fall, the reason is, things like broccoli, cauliflower, and kale, they're not going to withstand the heat while they're trying to establish themselves. So you're going to start them indoors so that they're in a cooler temperature while they gain a root ball and get a little strength to them. And then you're able to transplant them at the appropriate time when the weather has started to cool off, and you'll still be able to get fruit before the first frost hits. So starting them indoors is a better opportunity for you to have success with those. In the wintertime, there are certain things that you'll want to start indoors, like your tomatoes and peppers, because they have such a long period till maturity that starting them indoors in, say, January or February will have them at the appropriate height to put in your garden and transplant when it comes time to transplant in the spring. So the first thing we're going to discuss is containers. So you want to select the right container to start your seeds in. Now you don't have to go out and buy a fancy tray like this one. You can if you want to, but you can also repurpose old containers from where you bought plants at the store. Or if you have friends that don't save their containers and they want to give them to you, like some of my friends have done for me, then you can acquire some containers that way. If you don't have any containers to repurpose, or you don't want to spend money on a new tray, then another option is that you can take red solo cups or even the clear solo cups, and you can poke holes in the bottom. And this is very important because you need drainage. So you want to always make sure you poke enough holes in the bottom that the plant can take up water, because you're going to water from the bottom, and we'll discuss that in a minute. Now, I would suggest, if you can, repurpose trays to save things like this, because it is better to start small seeds in smaller cells than to start them in a larger container. And the reason is about moisture control. So in a small cell, you can control the area to keep it moist for the root ball and the roots to develop without keeping them soggy. Whereas to keep a larger container wet enough for that root ball to get what it needs without it staying soggy all the time is a little bit more difficult. Now, once the plant is larger and it has more root and it's taking up more water, it's not as difficult to control as it is when the plant is smaller. So starting with a small cell is a little bit easier to control the moisture. The other advantage of a small cell is it allows the roots to develop and fill that space. And so you get a good root ball that will allow the soil to hold together and make it easier for transplanting later. Now, once the plant starts to get to a certain size where things are starting to crowd together, then you can transplant them over into a larger container. But to start off, I would recommend that you start with a cell, but you don't have to, but I would definitely recommend it. So once you've chosen the right container, the next step is to choose the right soil. And this is a really important step. You want to make sure that you get a seed starting soil because it has been sterilized. And so it's killed the fungi and bacteria that can cause diseases, things like dampening off disease. And it also has killed larvae and eggs that might be in the soil so that you don't end up with gnats. And these are very important things to give your sprout a healthy start before you get it out into the garden. And there's other issues if you use different types of soils. For example, I used a fully mature compost one time, and the issue with that was that it didn't hold together well. And so when it came time to transplant, all of the soil let go of the root ball, and that makes it a lot harder to transplant and have a healthy transplant process. And so that's not something that you want to happen when you're getting ready to transplant your plants out into your garden. You want as much soil as possible to hold on to that root ball. And of course, if you choose just any dirt from the garden or your yard, it may not have the proper drainage, which of course can cause the roots of your plant to rot even before you get a good start. So choosing the right soil is very important. Now, once you have the right soil, I'm going to show you how to mix it up. Before you start, you want it to be the proper moisture level when you start, and it makes it a lot easier for your seeds to make good contact with the soil and have the moisture it needs to get that start. So we're going to mix that up right now, and I'll show you exactly what levels you need. So I normally just put the soil down into a bucket and start adding water a little bit at a time and stirring it, and then I'll check it with my fist and squeeze it. You want it to hold together really good. As you can see here, it's holding together and keeping its shape well. And then when I squeeze it, you don't have an excessive amount of water that comes out, but you can see where my glove is getting really, really wet because it's soaking through my glove. So it's got plenty of moisture there, and that's where you want it. You want it to have a good amount of moisture without being overly wet that it just drips when you squeeze it. So once you get it to the right moisture, we're going to go add it to our trays. So now we're going to spread it over the cells evenly. And once we have it spread evenly, we're going to gently press down on each cell and tamp that in. You don't want to press too hard. You're just gently pressing it down so that it fills the cell without packing it. If you pack it too hard, then it's hard for the sprout to develop the roots properly and spread throughout the cell. So you don't want to overpack it, but just gently tamp it down. Now, once we have it tamped down really good, we're going to add, I don't know if you can see here, we're going to pour our seeds out into our hand, and we're going to get 2 or 3 seeds at a time and put 2 to 3 seeds in each cell around the middle, but you want to kind of spread them a little bit so that if you have more than one sprout that comes up, you can separate them later when you move them to a larger container. Now, once you have 2 to 3 seeds in each cell, then you're going to add just a thin layer, and these are small seeds right here, so you don't want them too deep. You're going to add a thin layer of soil on the top, and then you're gently going to press again You're not going to press too hard and pack it, but gently press down. What you're wanting is that you want that seed to have good contact with the soil and with that moisture so that it will germinate. Now, once you have all your seeds in and you've pressed them all down so that everything has good contact, the next thing is that you want it to be either in front of a south facing window. And if you don't have a south facing window, then I do recommend putting it under some sort of grow light. Now, I don't have a fancy grow light. I bought this years ago. It's just a simple little grow light that attaches to a table because I didn't have a greenhouse and I just had a table in my craft room. So I wanted something that would clip to it and it just plugs up to a regular plug. And this is all I've ever needed to start my seeds every year. And I started peppers and tomatoes in my house every year for years until I finally got a greenhouse. And so this right here, you want to clip, just anything like this will work. And I've even heard of people using lamps and things like that as long as it has the right sort of light. So once you have this, you want it to be about 2 inches above your tray. And then as the sprouts come up, you're going to move this up higher and higher so that it stays that 2 inch distance always above the sprouts. And the reason that you want light above it or for it to be in a south facing window so it gets plenty of light and it doesn't have to strain for it is because if you don't provide the proper amount of light, then what's going to happen is you're going to get what they call leggy sprouts. And let me show you what it looks like. Now these are leggy sprouts. I did not put them in a south facing window and I did not plug the light up so that you could see what they are going to look like if you do not provide them with the proper light above them. So these are leggy. As you can see, they're really long, like this one right here. They're very long and they're very weak. So what happens is that the seeds have to stretch so much that to try to get the light that they need that they grow really long. And that causes the stem to become weak because it is longer than it needs to be at this stage. And so this causes you to have a weak stem that is not going to be a healthy support for your plant and is more likely to break in conditions like wind and things like that. So you always want to make sure that you provide the proper light for your plants to thrive and not become leggy. You want them to stand up properly. So not every seed needs light to germinate like tomatoes and peppers, and some do like lettuce. But even the ones that don't need light to germinate, the moment that those sprouts emerge from the soil, they do need to be under light in order for those sprouts to continue to grow into a healthy plant. So you want to immediately get them under light as soon as they start to emerge. Once you have your seeds going, you want to make sure that you water regularly and that you don't water from over the top. You always want to water from underneath because if you overhead water these sprouts, first of all, they're weak and so it can damage them. And the other problem is that you can cause mold and mildew and funguses in your plants and your soil. You don't want that to damage your sprouts. So what you're going to do is you need a tray of some sort and you will put your water into the tray and then place your plants in that and it will take the water up from below. And as you can see right here, this one is very damp. It is taking the water up from below. Now some of them may appear dry, but we know that it's taken the water up because there was plenty of water in there when we filled it and we let it set for 15 to 30 minutes. And you don't want it to sit longer than that. If you let it sit in the water too long, then what can happen is that you can cause root rot. So 15 to 30 minutes so that it dampens really well. And if some of them aren't damp on the surface, as long as they're damp underneath and the roots are getting what they need, then they're good. Now, if you don't have a tray that has a container underneath, then there's some other options. So one of the things I like to do, and I'll show you real quick. Let me take the camera over here. So as you see here, I like to use just one of these containers that slides underneath the bed, and I will set it up on my table in my greenhouse, and then I can I usually keep, my plants in these types of trays right here, and then I can set the tray over into it. Or if I'm using solo cups, I can just set the solo cups directly into it and take them out when I need to. And this is any kind of container that can hold water and that you can set your plants down inside to water them and then remove it from them or empty the container. That will work. The other thing that you can do when you're starting, which depending on what time of year you're starting and what the plant is that you're starting, is whether you want to use this or not, is that you can use a seed mat. Now, these get hot and heat the soil from underneath so that the soil is the right temperature and gives them an extra start. And I haven't needed to use this very much. I use it for my tomatoes and peppers more than I do anything, but for seeds for the fall, I don't I don't typically use them. Now, as we've discussed, once your plants get to a certain size and they start crowding into each other, then it's time to transplant them over into a larger container if it's not time to put them in your garden yet. Now, if it's the springtime and the weather hasn't warmed up enough and it's not time to transplant them outside, then you're going to want to move them to another container so they don't become root bound and they're not tangling up with each other. If it's the summertime and you're preparing for a fall garden, then you're waiting for that cooler spell before you transplant them out into the garden. So if they become overly large in your containers, then you can move them over into another container before you transplant them out into the garden. So the next step is knowing when you're ready to transplant. The first thing that you need to know is it appropriate weather outside? So if it's the springtime, then depending on what the plant is, you're going to want to wait until the temperatures are above 50 consistently at night and reaching 70 degrees consistently during the day. That way, it has the proper soil temperature for those plants to survive. If it's the fall, then you're waiting for temperatures to be consistently under 80 degrees before you transplant outside into your garden. So, that is the first thing that you need to know before you transplant. The next thing is you want to look at your plants themselves. Are they strong enough? Do they have true leaves yet? And what does the root ball look like? You want to make sure it has a good enough root ball to get established once you transplanted it outside, and that it has those true leaves so that it has the best chance of success. But before you can transplant them out into your garden, you have to harden them off first. And this process usually takes somewhere between 7 to 10 days. So you're not going to want to put them out in full sun and just leave them out there all day. You're going to want to place them someplace that is partially shaded. I prefer a place that gets morning sun but no afternoon sun. So usually I have a little shaded spot in our carport that I set them that they get a good amount of morning sun, and by the time the afternoon comes, it's completely in the shade. I also don't leave them out in direct sunlight or so that it's overhead, and I don't get them out there so that they get rained on if the rain comes, because they're not quite ready for that yet. Then as the process goes along, they will harden up and they will be prepared to withstand this full direct sunlight and the wind and the other things that come along. When you're doing this process, you also want to make sure that you keep them moist. Make sure you water them every day because they are going to dry out a lot faster than they did inside. There's one step that I also like to do when I'm growing indoor plants, and it's not necessary, but it does help strengthen your plants a lot. That is to have a fan somewhere that's blowing onto the plants and giving that simulation of wind. And this allows the stem to gain strength. Now you don't want it direct, you don't want it like really close to your plant. So in my greenhouse, I have the plants on one side of the greenhouse, I have the fan completely on the other side. So there's probably about 3 to 4 feet between the fan and the actual plants. And the fan blows on them, and I usually do have it on high. It blows, and you'll see the plants swaying, but they keep that stem strength, and that's something they're going to need when they go out into the garden and the wind is blowing constantly out there. They need to be able to withstand that, so they'll lay over, but they'll stand back up because they have the strength in the stem to be able to deal with wind. So if you don't have a place to start them that's completely sheltered from the afternoon sun and only has morning sun, then my suggestion is to start them very slowly. You still only want to use morning light and not afternoon light in this hardening off process. You want to start them maybe 15 minutes the first day and then work your way up slowly over the next 7 to 10 days. You never want to use afternoon sun because it will definitely fry your transplants before you make it out to the garden. So always use morning light, and that will give them the best opportunity to gain that hardness. I know it seems a little backwards to think that it can't survive in this in full afternoon sun, but somehow it makes it in the garden. But it does make a difference being in ground versus in a small container during this process. Then once you have them transplanted, you want to make sure that you keep them watered well. You want to keep the soil moist until they have time to get established. And that usually takes several days for the plant to become established. If you follow these steps, then you should have good success with your own garden. Remember, the goal isn't just to get a seed to sprout, but it's to get it from seed to germination to a healthy established plant. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments if there's any questions or topics that you'd like me to cover in the future. And until next time, happy gardening.